on to our next presenter, who is joining us asynchronously, has a recorded video for us. And this is Tanea Kuntz, who is actually the president of the Afro-American Genealogy and History organization in Nashville, and the 10 Gen Web board member and creator of the Academy of Legacy Leaders Facebook group. And Tanea will be discussing her project on the Tennessee Genealogical Indexing from the Page project, which has been using From the Page to crowdsource more than 9,000 names and counting from historical newspapers. And let me get her video.
Tanea is also one of the partners with Camille.
Yes, exactly, with the Tennessee Genealogical. Okay, can you see the video?
To join live in the conversation and in the webinar. So hopefully this recorded present.
Here we go.
Hi, my name is Tanea Kuntz, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you information about our Tennessee Historical Newspaper Indexing Project. I do regret that I'm not able to join live in the conversation and in the webinar, but hopefully this recorded presentation will give you insight into what we're doing and how the project is going so far. Now, I am working on this project in collaboration with a good colleague of mine, Billy McNamara, who I believe is also present at the webinar today. So she can answer any questions that you have after I'm done with the presentation. And you can also feel free to email us and contact us through the project website. So I'll get started for the sake of time and just take you through the steps of what we're doing. Now, I wanted to start with an example of why this project is important. Now, this is an image of a rather tongue-in-cheek depiction of the phrase needle in a haystack. But working with newspapers is very much like needle in a haystack. Sometimes it can be difficult to find the information you're seeking. Well, let me show you this obituary. This was published in 1850, and it's an obituary for a woman named Mrs. Martha Pettit. This is one of the obituaries that was indexed from the early phases of our project. And I just drew it at random because I was curious, how discoverable is this obituary currently? And what I learned was that it's not very. There are more than 80 individuals on Ancestry, for example, that have her in their tree. None of them had her obituary. The newspaper is digitized and available online at the Chronicling America website, as well as newspapers.com. Well, searching for it would probably not be very successful because the optical character recognition that's been done on this particular obituary doesn't have her name correct. There are no published books of anyone who's gone through McMinn County newspapers to look and pull out details of individuals that are named. So at the current state, it can be difficult to locate this obituary. But we have now indexed it, and it is now part of the data we're collecting, and our volunteers are making obituaries like this more discoverable. So that's particularly exciting for us. Now, to carry out this project, we are fortunate that we can leverage on a long history of genealogy volunteerism. Billy and I are both involved with the U.S. GenWeb project, particularly the Tennessee GenWeb project, which is a volunteer-driven initiative to provide genealogy information online for free. All of this information comes from volunteers. Our websites are coordinated by volunteers. So our community is very familiar with this concept of just genealogy goodwill. On top of that, we have had initiatives such as Family Search's indexing, which has been doing crowdsourced indexing since 2006. And they've coordinated and facilitated some very large projects, such as indexing the 1940 census and the upcoming 1950 census, with a strong reliance on volunteers. So the great thing about our genealogy community is that they're used to this model of crowdsourced approaches to index historical records, and that is good for our work. This is the website of our Tennessee Newspapers project on the From the Page platform. So what we are doing is loading issues of historical newspapers into the site so that our volunteers can index names and organizations that appear on the pages. Where is this data coming from? How are we sourcing our newspapers? Well, I can tell you that we are so fortunate in that the Tennessee State Library and Archives has been intentionally collecting and microfilming newspaper issues all across the state of Tennessee for decades. So they're microfilming their newspapers, and we're able to leverage that. Now, we're starting off this project with some of those microfilm issues that have been digitized and made available online, but we are doing this project in partnership with TSLA. So we will be able to get to the microfilm records themselves. TSLA will continue to do more digitization, and we can include that into this project for our volunteers to work with. So we're incredibly thankful for all the hard work that the Tennessee State Library and Archives has been doing, because without it, this would be an even more monumental task than it is. This is a screenshot of what it looks like for our volunteers when they come to the site, and we pull up their digital issue for them to look at. And rather than transcription, we're doing indexing, and we're leveraging the spreadsheet template that FromThePage now offers. And this is particularly exciting for us because it allows us to be very specific in the details that our volunteers will capture. So we're presenting to them the spreadsheet that includes the column the name appears on, or the organization name appears on. If it is a personal name they're capturing, we want the prefix, the given name, the last name, the suffix. We have a way for them to indicate if a person is described as not white. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, whether or not there's a photo, and we have a category for article type. So these are 11 different categories that we've come up with that allow our volunteers to give a little bit more context to the name or organization that they're capturing. We're very excited to be using the spreadsheet format because it's really been the basis for how we're able to carry out this project. I want to take one moment to talk about how we're documenting persons of color, right? There are a myriad of terms that have been used over the decades to describe individuals who are not white. And we want to be able to capture the fact that a person is described as not being white, but we do not want to reuse some of that vocabulary and some of that terminology. So we elected to go with the checkbox option. So when a person is explicitly described as not being white, our volunteers can check that box. This is helpful for the researcher because they can look at a name and look at that field. And if they're researching African-American families, it helps them narrow in a little bit better if they see that this checkbox is checked. At this stage of the project, we do not have African-American newspapers loaded, but we are going to be doing that soon. In Tennessee, we have some options that we can choose from, and we will be including as much as we can. And this includes Maryville Republican in East Tennessee, the Chattanooga Blade, and a very long-run newspaper is the Nashville Globe, which was an African-American newspaper published in Nashville, Tennessee from 1907 to 1960, I believe. So it has a very long run and was of critical importance to the African-American community. In fact, an analysis of the communities covered in the Nashville Globe, published in mid-Tennessee, just gives you a feel for how extensive their coverage was. And this is a map that was created of issues from 1907 to 1918. So as we think about their publication into 1960, we know that this coverage gets even more in depth. So you have a paper published in Middle Tennessee that's covering African-American communities across the state. So for anyone who's from Tennessee and from an African-American family, having access to a human curated and human provided index is going to be incredibly helpful. Now, what's going to happen to this data when we're done collecting it? We are so happy because the Tennessee State Library and Archives is going to be incorporating it into one of their online web databases. The data will be made available for free for Tennessee researchers to use, or any researcher who's connecting to their Tennessee roots to search and leverage. So the work of all of our volunteers is definitely part of this genealogy goodwill. It's going to be made available for free. Now, before I conclude, I want to give another example of how impactful having this type of index can be. This is an obituary of a woman whose name was Mrs. Mary. She was the wife of Reverend Nelson Mary, who was the first ordained Black minister in Nashville. And when she passed away in 1917, there was a huge write-up about her in the Nashville Globe. Now, even though this issue has been digitized and is available online, getting to it can be a little bit interesting. So the fact that we're going to be able to name index it will help anyone who's looking for her or her family. And of note, in this particular description of her life, they mention her parents. And they mention that her parents were free. They were not enslaved. She was born around 1827. So this is definitely during the period when most African Americans in the country were enslaved. So to be able to access this newspaper article and learn this detail about her can be helpful to a researcher. In fact, if I go look at the 1830 census for that county, I do see a Edward Jones listed. Now, whether or not it's her father or someone else would require additional investigation, but just think about the possibility of someone who is researching, finds this information about her being from a family that was free, and having the opportunity to go look at other records to help see if they can investigate that further. Incredibly impactful to have an index that enables us to do this. To give you an update on where we are so far, it's been phenomenal. Our volunteers have indexed more than 300 pages because the numbers on our site now do not reflect data that we've already pulled down. And even though it says 7,000 index records on the screen, it's actually more like 10,000 at this point. So we've been engaged in this indexing process for about 2 months. And for us to have 10,000 index names already, it's just indescribable. So we know that as the project grows and more volunteers come on board, we're going to be able to have an even larger impact. So I thank you for your time today in letting us share this project with you. We're excited about it and are looking forward to seeing it grow and having even more impact for Tennessee researchers. Thank you.
I wish Tanea was here because that was so awesome. And we are going to share this recording of the overall thing with her so she can see this. But that was really great to see. And I think it highlighted the impact of indexing and transcribing, and also collaboration being a huge key. Even thinking back to Camille's project and how she collaborated with Tanea to verify some of these names and get information, I think is super impactful.
What I love about this project is Tanea and Billy they're pushing this data back to the Tennessee State Archives, right? They're like, this is important. We're going to do it. I really hope you have a place for it, right? Which is not the model of archival engagement that we historically see, but I think it's so amazing. And Tennessee is so lucky to have people who are pushing the engagement and working so hard to find all these names, 10,000 names. I mean, that's great. Debbie Ann had a comment in the comments, the chat section about the Staten Island was mentioned in the Globe from Tennessee. And this is one of the things we find. It does not take that much material to start finding the overlaps, right? Stuff overlaps all the time. We have less than 1.5 million pages transcribed on From the Page on tons of different types of projects, and the number of places they overlap is amazing. So I think that's just really, really cool.
That is really cool. And it'd be cool to push it even further and do some location mapping or something like that with that data.